Welcome back again to the BIAYL Enoch project, and we continue with chapter 5 of book 4. Before we continue, I noticed that this section of chapter 5 might be a little bit less familiar, but we'll see what we can decipher from it. I think one of the things that will be helpful to keep in our minds is that the sheep, the ones that have been brought to lead the other sheep that are wandering, have been placed there as leading sheep to help bring the wandering sheep back to worship of God, who is the good shepherd, which the Bible tells us about. But these sheep seem to forsake their role. Some of them do good by doing what they're supposed to do, and some of them, instead of leading the sheep in the right direction back to God, they take advantage of them. So let's dive in and see how that unfolds today. Starting at verse 90 of chapter 5 in book 4.
And again, I saw those sheep that they gained herd and went many ways, and forsook that their host. And the Lord of the sheep called some of from amongst the sheep, and sent them to the sheep, but the sheep began to slay them. And one of them was saved and was not slain. And it sped away and cried aloud over the sheep. And they sought to slay it, but the Lord of the sheep saved it from the sheep, and brought it to me, and caused it to dwell there. And the many other sheep he sent to those sheep to testify unto them and lament over them. And after that I saw that when they forsook the house of the Lord, and his tower fell away entirely, and their eyes were blinded. And I saw the Lord of the sheep, how he wrought much slaughter amongst them in their herds, until those sheep invited that slaughter, and betrayed his place. And he gave them over into the hands of the lions and tigers and wolves and hyenas, and into the hands of the foxes, and to all the wild beasts. And those wild beasts began to tear in pieces those sheep. And I saw that he forsook that their house and their tower, and gave them all into the hand of the lions, to tear and devour them, into the hand of all the wild beasts. And I began to cry aloud with all my power, and to appeal to the Lord of the sheep, and to represent to him in regard to the sheep, that they were devoured by all the wild beasts. But he remained unmoved, though he saw it, and rejoiced that they were devoured, and swallowed and robbed, and left them to be devoured in the hand of the beast. And he called 70 shepherds, and cast those sheep to them, that they might pasture them. And he spake to the shepherds and their companions, let each individual of your pasture the sheep henceforth, and everything that I shall command you, that do ye. And I will deliver them over unto you duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy he. And he gave over unto them those sheep. And he called another, and spake unto him, observe and mark everything that the shepherds will do to those sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded them. And every excess and the destruction which will be wrought through the shepherds, record how many they destroyed according to my command, and how many according to their own caprice, record every against every individual shepherd all the destruction of the he effects, and read out before me by number how many they destroyed, and how many they deliver over for destruction, that I may have this as a testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, and that I may comprehend and see what they do, whether or not they abide by my command which I have commanded them. But they shall not know it, and thou shalt not declare it to them, nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds effect, each in his time, and laid before me. And I saw till those shepherds pastured in their season, and they began to slay and to destroy more than they were bidden, and they delivered those sheep into the hand of the lions. And the lions and tigers ate and devoured the greater part of those sheep, and the wild boars ate along with them, and they burnt that tower and demolished that house. And I became exceedingly sorrowful over that tower, because that house of the sheep was demolished, and afterwards I was unable to see if those sheep entered that house. And the shepherds and and their associates delivered over those sheep to all the wild beasts to devour them, and each of them received in his time a finite number. It was written by the other in a book how many each of them destroyed of them. And each one slew and destroyed many more than was prescribed. And I began to weep and lament on account of those sheep. And thus in the vision I saw that one who wrote how he wrote down every one that was destroyed by those shepherds day by day, and carried up and laid down and showed actually the whole book of the Lord to the sheep, everything that they had done, and all that each of them had made away with, and all that they had given over to destruction. And the book was read before the Lord of the sheep, and he took the book from his hand and read it and sealed it and laid it down. And forthwith I saw how the shepherds pastured for 12 hours. And behold, 3 of those sheep turned back and came and entered and began to build up all that had fallen down of that house. But the wild boars tried to hinder them, but they were not able to. And they began again to build as before, and they reared up that tower, and it was named the High Tower. And they began again to place a table before the tower, but all the bread on it was polluted and not pure. And as touching all this, the eyes of those sheep were blinded, so that they saw not, and their shepherds likewise. And they delivered them in large numbers to their shepherds for destructions, and they trampled the sheep with their feet and devoured them. And the Lord of the sheep remained unmoved till all the sheep were dispersed over the field and mingled with them, and they did not save them out of the hand of the beast. And this one who wrote the book carried it up and showed it and read it before the Lord of sheep, and implored him on their account and besought him on their account, as he showed him all the doings of the shepherds, and gave testimony before him against all the shepherds. And he took the actual book and laid it down beside him and departed. And I saw till that in this manner 35 shepherds undertook the pasturing, and they severally completed their periods, as did the first, and others received them into their hands to pasture them for their period, each shepherd in his own period. And after that I saw in my vision all the birds of heaven coming, the eagles, the vultures, the kites, the ravens. But the eagles led all the birds, and they began to devour those sheep, and to pick out their eyes, and to devour their flesh. And the sheep cried out because their flesh was being devoured by the birds. And as for me, I looked and lamented in my sleep over that shepherd who pastured the sheep. And I saw until those sheep were devoured by the dogs and eagles and kites, and they left neither flesh nor skin nor sinew remaining on them, till only their bones stood there. And their bones too fell to the earth, and the sheep became few. And I saw until that 23 had undertaken the pasturing and completed it in their several periods 58 times. But behold, lambs were born by those white sheep, and they began to open their eyes and to see and to cry to the sheep. Yet they cried to them, but they did not hearken to what they said to them, but were exceedingly deaf. Their eyes were exceedingly blinded. And I saw in the vision how the ravens flew upon those lambs, and took one of those lambs, and dashed the sheep in pieces, and devoured them. And I saw till horns grew upon those lambs, and the ravens cast down their horns. And I saw till there sprouted a great horn of one of those sheep, and their eyes were open. And it looked at them with their eyes open, and it cried to the sheep, and the ram saw it, and ran, and all ran to it. And notwithstanding all this, those eagles and vultures and ravens and kites still kept tearing the sheep and swooping down upon them and devouring them. Still the sheep remained silent, but the rams lamented and cried out. And those ravens fought and battled with it, and sought to lay low his horn, but they had no power over it. All the eagles and vultures and ravens and kites were gathered together, and there came with them all the sheep of the field. Yea, they all came together and helped each other to break that horn of the ram. And I saw till a great sword was given to the sheep, and the sheep proceeded against all the beasts of the field to slay them. And all the beasts and the birds of the heaven fled before their face. And I saw that man who wrote the book according to the command of the Lord, till he opened the book concerning the destruction which those 12 last shepherds had wrought, and showed that they had destroyed much more than their predecessors before the Lord of the sheep. And I saw till the Lord of the sheep came unto them, and took in his hand the staff of his wrath, and smote the earth, and the earth clave asunder, and all the beasts and all the birds of the heaven fell from among those sheep, and were swallowed up in the earth, and it covered them. And I saw till a throne was erected in the pleasant land, and the Lord of the sheep sat himself thereon, and other took the seal books and opened those books before the Lord of the sheep. And the Lord called those men the 7 first white ones, and commanded that they should bring before him, beginning with the first star which led the way, all the stars whose privy members were like those of horses, and they brought them all before him. And he said to that man who wrote before him, being one of those 7 white ones, and said to him, take those 70 shepherds to whom I deliver the sheep, and who, taking them on their own authority, slew more than I commanded them. And behold, they were all bound. I saw, and they all stood before him. And the judgment was held first over the stars, and they were judged and found guilty, and went to the place of condemnation, and they were cast into an abyss full of fire and flaming, and full of pillars of fire. And those 70 shepherds were judged and found guilty, and they were cast into the fiery abyss. And I saw at that time how a like abyss was opened in the midst of the earth, full of fire, and they brought those blinded sheep, and they were all judged and found guilty, and cast into the fire abyss, and they burned. Now the abyss was to the right of that house. And I saw those sheep burning, and their bones burning. And I stood up to see till they folded up that old house, and carried off all the pillars, and all the beams and ornaments of the house were at the same time folded up, with it, and they carried it off and laid it in a place in the south of the land. And I saw till the Lord of the sheep brought a new house greater and loftier than that first, and set it up in the place of the first, which had bare folded up. All its pillars were new, and its ornaments were new and larger than those of the first. The old one which he had taken away, and all the sheep were within it. And I saw all the sheep which had been left, and all the beasts on the earth, and all the birds of the heaven falling down and doing homage to those sheep, and making petition to and obeying them in everything. And thereafter those three who were clothed in white, and had seized me by my hand, who had taken me up before, and the hand of that ram also seizing hold of me, they took me up and set me down on the midst of those sheep before the judgment took place. And those sheep were all white, and their wool was abundant and clean. And all that had been destroyed and dispersed, and all the beasts of the field, and all the birds of the heaven, assembled in that host, and the Lord of the sheep rejoiced with great joy, because they were all good and had returned to his house. And I saw till they laid down that sword which had been given to the sheep, and they brought it back into the house, and it was sealed before the presence of the Lord. And all the sheep were invited into the house, but it held them not. And the eyes of them were open, and they saw the good, and there was not one among them that did not see. And I saw that house was large and broad and very full. And I saw that a white bull was born with large horns, and all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air feared him and made petition to him all the time. And I saw till all their generations were transformed, and all became white bulls, and the first among them became a lamb, and that lamb became a great animal and had black horns on its head, and the Lord of the sheep rejoiced over it and over all the oxen. And I slept in their midst, and I woke and saw everything. This is a vision which I saw while I slept. I awoke and blessed the Lord of righteousness and gave him glory. Then I wept with great weeping, and my tears stayed not till I could no longer endure it. When I saw, they flowed on account of what I had seen, for everything shall come and be fulfilled, and all the deeds of men in their order are shown to me. On that night I remembered the first dream, and because of it I wept and was troubled, because I had seen that vision.
So we continue today with this interesting animal apocalypse, as some call it. And then, as I said before, we see where there is still this idea of the sheep and the sheep that are supposed to be shepherds. In this half of the chapter, we see a mention of 70 shepherds who are put to pasture the sheep, and they're giving specific commands. But then, not far after that, the Lord commands someone else to make record and watch them, because he knows that they're not going to pasture the sheep properly. They'll destroy and bring destruction outside of the command that God gives them. And this record is supposed to be kept, I believe, to be able to give account on the judgment day against these shepherds that are mishandling the sheep. There are a couple different interpretations for what it means by the 70 shepherds. Some believe it is angelic rulers, and we see the possibility of that in the Bible when we read Daniel, and it talks about the prince of Persia, who is an angelic type figure who is understood to be the one that controls the earthly king of Persia and also the one of Greece. Some also see the 70 as the 70 nations mentioned in Genesis. And that one in particular is very interesting to me. I'm hopefully one day I can give more detail about that. But for now, I'll just make that mention. And then also in the Bible, it could echo the 70 elders of Israel and also the 70 years that Israel goes into exile. So There are many different 70s that are in the Bible that this could be symbolic of, but it is interesting just to take note of that. There are two verses that I will read that sound very similar to this. One of them also makes mention of something else that we see in the passage where it says that the Lord of the sheep is unmoved. And then that same one who makes the recording does some intercession and petition for the Lord, I guess, to not be unmoved. Isaiah 47, verse 6 gives us a little bit of this. It says, I was angry with my people and desecrated my inheritance. I gave them into your hand, and you showed them no mercy. Even on the aged, you laid a very heavy yoke. So there we see where the Lord is angry with his sheep, I guess similar to being unmoved by what they're doing. And there's some other references in scripture that talk about that. But then he talks about how he hands them over. And in this case, in the scripture, it is to Babylon, which is kind of interesting because that would kind of probably link the 70 shepherds to that 70 years in exile in Babylon. And then he accuses Babylon of showing them no mercy. There are also another set of verses in Ezekiel chapter 34 that talk about how the shepherds mistreat the sheep. This one I'll read from verse 11 and read a bit of it. I'll read from 11 to 24. And you can hear some of the same shepherd and sheep language and how God talks about how he will come and be the shepherd of his sheep because the ones that he left them in the care of to pasture, they didn't do well. So Ezekiel 34:11 to 24 says, For this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search and find my sheep. I will be like a shepherd looking for his scattered flock. I'll find my sheep and rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on that dark and cloudy day. I'll bring them back home to their own land of Israel from among the peoples and the nations. I will feed them on the mountains of Israel and by the rivers and in all the places where people live. Yes, I will give them good pasture land on the high hills of Israel. There they will lie down in pleasant places and feed in the lush pastures of the hill. I myself will tend my sheep and give them a place to lie down in peace, says the sovereign Lord. I will search for my lost ones who strayed away, and I will bring them safely home again. I will bandage the injured and strengthen the weak, but I will destroy those who are fat and powerful. I will feed them, yes, feed them justice. And in verse 17, listen to what he says about the shepherds. And as for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says to his people. I will judge between one animal of the flock and another, separating the sheep from the goats. Isn't it enough for you to keep the best of the pastures for yourselves? Must you also trample down the rest? Isn't it enough for you to drink clear water for yourselves? Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Why must my flock eat what you have trampled down and drink water you fouled? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will surely judge between the fat sheep and the scrawny sheep. For you fat sheep pushed and butted and crowded my sick and hungry flock until you scattered them to distant lands. So I will rescue my flock, and they will no longer be abused. I will judge between one animal of the flock and another, and I will set over them one shepherd, my servant David. He will feed them and be a shepherd to them, and I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be a prince among my people. I, the Lord, have spoken. And obviously, this reference of David is talking about the shoot that comes from David, which is the Messiah. So we give God thanks for his rescuing. He listens to the petition of the one that prayed. And then coming towards the end of our passage, again, we have judgment against these bad sheep and also judgment against some sheep that were blinded and made to be deaf. The Bible talks about something like that as well, where Isaiah is told to prophesy to the people and to make their eyes blind and make them deaf. Also, we see Jesus making mention of that too in the book of John. But I guess all of these will be judged together with the bad shepherds on the judgment day. And then that judgment ends with the restoration of a house, which I guess the temple was spoken of as damaged twice, if it is what we see in the Bible, which does actually happen. And then in Revelations, it does talk about how the Lord is making everything new and a new Jerusalem and all of that good stuff. So I hope I covered a good amount of it. There are probably some other stuff in there that are new to me and probably I would want to explore a little bit more. But largely, this is an interesting prophecy. I think it also resembles some things that we see in the Bible where there's a recounting of history and prophecy comes to a point where it's very accurate to a point, and then towards the end, it starts to get a little bit foggy, I guess, as it relates to future events that are still to come even today. And I guess it's easy to see things in hindsight rather than clearly identifying what is in the future. Either way, I pray that the Lord will help us to not be blinded by anything and just to stay focused on Him. I pray that He will open our eyes and open our ears to hear and open our hearts to receive. And I pray that He will help us to glorify Him in all that we do because Jesus Christ is Lord. Amen. Thank you again for joining us on this podcast. And remember that you can always join us on the Bible reading podcast as we read through the whole Bible in a year. You can find the details for that in the description below and also on our website at BIAYL.Project.com. Blessings. We have one more book to read and then we'll have completed the book of Enoch.